all these homes were selling and the prices were jumping, so there was obviously a housing shortage. And I also don't think it's as simplistic as saying, well, there's homes sitting now and homes aren't selling, so it's obvious there was no housing shortage. I think there's more things to it. Hey everyone, for this week's Rockstar Minute, I want to take a little bit of a look at some numbers around the Golden Horseshoe housing market or the Toronto area, if you're not familiar with it, to get a sense of what's really going on, because there's been a bit of a narrative shift. For a couple of years, people were talking about, well, there's this housing shortage and that's why prices are jumping so much because there's just this lack of housing. And now there's the reverse side where people are coming out and saying, well, hey, what's happened to this housing shortage as new construction sales have really gone way down, as resale listings continue to increase in many different areas. Then people are looking around saying, hey, so if there's this housing shortage, why are all these housing options? Why aren't these buyers coming in to scoop this up? So I just want to take a look at some numbers. And to give you some context, my brother and I founded Rockstar Real Estate. Maybe that's 16, 17 years ago now. We've been investors in this area for over 2 decades. I don't want to age myself too much, but it's been over 2 decades. So I don't know exactly how long anymore. So through our own investing and through working with a lot of different investors, we're always looking for an information advantage. And that's why we always look at this data to try to use this data for our own investing and with the investors we're working with. Okay, so here are the inflation-adjusted house prices in Canada, and you can see over the long term these numbers have continued to increase. And there are a number of reasons for that. We don't have time for everything in this video, but you can see that the pace at which they had increased has really increased. That pace has increased from the year 2000 onwards is really what's happened. But it's no surprise that those numbers have gone up. And here's our population growth. So our population growth right around this middle section here, around 2016, 17. Some immigration rules changed around here, so immigration really picked up in Canada, and it's really exploded over the last few years, and they're looking at making some changes to that as well. But people are looking at this saying, hey, look, with all these people coming in, there's not enough housing. That's what some people are saying, but it's a really simplistic argument because there's more factors to that. It's not just about number of houses being built or available in Canada and people coming into Canada. We have to look at other things. One of those things we have to look at is the area that people are coming into. So for example, if we look at here, we can see the annual population growth broken down by different provinces, and look at Ontario as the outlier there because the number of people that have been coming into Ontario has really spiked over the last few years. So if we're looking at Canadian housing starts or Canadian housing supply, it's not really indicative of what's going on in this market in Ontario specifically, because there's more stress on this market with more people coming in. But then we have to look at the supply side. So before we get into that, let's break this down one step further. We saw the number of people coming into Ontario, and the people coming into Ontario, here's where they're going. Actually, this is the people coming into Canada, and you can see out of the people coming into Canada, this is back in 2021, but gives you an understanding of where people are ending up. Between the city of Toronto, Peel region, which is immediately to the west of Toronto, and the remaining greater Toronto Hamilton area, that accounts for, let me just look at this, it's 15, 8, and 9. It's 32%, almost 1/3 of the people coming into Canada at that time was coming into that pocket of the area. So not only is Ontario exploding, but that pocket of Ontario is really exploding as well. So that's why some people are like, with so many people coming into this one area, we don't have the supply to keep up. This is where the housing shortage is coming from. That's where this narrative is coming from. So now let's look at that. Here's the completions in Ontario from 1990 to 2023. You can see they kind of have leveled out for the most part. Got up and down a little bit, but they leveled up for the most part. But what's really interesting is over that period of time, the type of unit really changed. And you can see that apartment type or higher density, high-rise type housing has really gone up, while the low density of what's labeled here as the ground-related housing options have stayed about the same or flatlined. So the new housing stock that's coming onto the market is really more apartment-like and high-rise type housing options that may not be suitable for everyone, especially with some of the newer projects when it's really kind of smaller type, 500 square foot condos that are being built, and that might not apply to either a couple looking to start a family or families or with people in different living situations as well. So something to consider there. So it's not just where these properties are in demand, it's the types of properties that are available too. And when we look at it this way, you can see the proportion of apartments as the percent of units under construction from 1990 to 2023, it's about 80% right now. So about 80% of the new housing stock is apartment type housing stock. This is a big change, a big shift over the last number of years that we've seen with this growth. And this is what it looks like in Toronto specifically, where you can see condos are really making up the new housing stock. Single families really kind of come down over the years, and now some rentals are taking up as well. So this thing's being out of whack. So a couple of things, when people were saying that there was a housing shortage, it was a very simplistic statement. There wasn't maybe a housing shortage across Canada, but in certain pockets of Canada, there could be a housing shortage because of the population that was coming in, creating new demand, and the lack of supply or increased supply to meet that demand, or the types of units being built. So that's where things kind of got out of whack. But then something big changed. And affordability changed in a big way over the last couple of years because of interest rates. And here we can see how interest rates have moved, right? The variable rates versus fixed rates have both kind of jumped, and that changes ownership costs for people. So now affordability is really kind of plummeted. It's out the window. People really, where prices are and with where interest rates are, it's really hard. It's a lot harder for people to afford these mortgages on these properties. So that leads to the question, is there a housing shortage or not? Because if there was a housing shortage, wouldn't people be buying up these properties? But it's hard to think they would because of the affordability changes that have happened during that time. And what we're seeing is, instead of the property prices increasing, where we've seen demand shift is we've seen demand shift into other areas, and we've seen demand shift into other types of living arrangements like rentals. Here's what's happened to rental inflation over the last few years as well. If you look at the rent inflation numbers, they're historically high. We don't typically see rent inflation year over year numbers like this. So in my opinion, what's happened is we've seen, as affordability has really changed, we've seen a lot of people that would have liked to purchase a property now get removed from the market, and they've had to go into the rental market, and it's driving the same dynamics that we've seen in the past in the purchasing market or the ownership market translate into the rental market. And we've seen people go out of more expensive areas, moving into cheaper areas. We've seen people maybe move into smaller units than they would want to move into. And we've seen prices increase in the rental market as well versus the ownership market. So we're still seeing an imbalance, a supply-demand imbalance, but we're just seeing it in a different segment of the market. Does it mean there's a major housing shortage? People are probably going to have different opinions of that. But if you look at what's happening on the streets in the market, it's showing that there is a supply and demand imbalance. Because if there was enough supply to meet the demand, it's very unlikely to see rent increases increase this way. Just like if there was enough supply to meet the demand when interest rates were low and affordability was high to purchase properties, it would be unlikely that we would see price appreciations and price jumps that way, even with a certain percentage of speculation and different things happening from investors and that type of thing. So that's how we're looking at the market. There's multiple factors to every argument. I don't think it's as simplistic as saying, well, all these homes were selling and the prices were jumping, so there was obviously a housing shortage. And I also don't think it's as simplistic as saying, well, there's homes sitting now and homes aren't selling, so it's obvious there was no housing shortage. I think there's more things to it. We got to consider area, affordability, types of properties, and a few other factors too. Those are the big ones we look at. And this is the type of thing that we're looking at to get a sense of the market for ourselves, to make our own investing decisions. That's what I want to share with you.